Hello, guys. Welcome back to Faith Movies. Today's movie recap will be a thriller and crime movie from 2015 called Captive. Warning, there are spoilers ahead. The movie begins in a therapy clinic with a woman named Ashley. She narrates how she lost everything due to her addiction to hard drugs. Her daughter was taken from her as she was deemed unfit to raise a child. She tells the other addicts how she has tried several times to stop but couldn't. At the end of the therapy session, the therapist approaches Ashley and asks her if she is okay. Apparently, Ashley's daughter will not be returned to her if she does not complete the therapy session and stop using hard drugs. The therapist encourages Ashley to try her best for the sake of her daughter. She also gives her a book titled The Purpose-Driven Life. Ashley thanks her for the book but throws it into the trash as she is about to leave. The scene shifts to a man named Brian being taken to court. He is being charged with rape and is taken to a cell before the trial. Upon reaching the cell, Brian knocks out the officer, putting her in a coma. He takes her gun and radio and then heads for the courtroom. Once there, he shoots the judge and another lawyer. At this point, the alarm goes off and all officers start looking for the suspect. Brian steals a car in an attempt to escape, but the area is surrounded by the police. He gets out, searching for a way to flee. Meanwhile, Ashley is on her way to work but is having trouble with her car. She arrives late and receives a warning from her boss. However, he also gives her a book from the therapist. He has picked up the book from the trash can where Ashley had dropped it. Additionally, the news about Brian has spread everywhere, prompting the police to intensify efforts to apprehend this notorious criminal. Brian somehow successfully escapes and steals another car, driving to see his girlfriend and child. Upon arrival, he stops at the window, seeing his girlfriend watching the news of what he just did. While still staring at them, the police arrive. Brian hides on the other side of the road. The officers interrogate his girlfriend, Lynn, asking if Brian had contacted her, but she tells them she hasn't seen him since the rape incident. Following this, Ashley's daughter and her aunt visit her at her workplace. Her aunt helps her with part of her rent and pleads with her to keep her promise to her daughter to attend a kids' fashion show. Meanwhile, Brian is still on the run. He is seen planning to hijack a truck after noticing on the radio that the police know the type of car he is driving. At home, Ashley succumbs to her addiction again and takes the same hard drugs. While preparing for her daughter's fashion show, Brian, who had been roaming around in that environment, sees her and sneaks up on her. Brian warns her to be quiet, threatening to shoot her if she makes any noise. He binds her hands and seizes her phone. Back at the station, Officer Chesner, who is responsible for the case, is informed by a doctor that Brian has a type of mental disorder. Brian, still skeptical, does not trust Ashley. He binds her legs as well and takes away every means of communication. After threatening her, Ashley tells Brian that her husband will be returning from his night shift by 6. This angers Brian because she had previously told him that she lives alone. Brian then puts on Ashley's husband's clothes. Officer Chesner and his team discover another person murdered by Brian. Brian tried to steal his car, and the man attempted to call the police. However, before he could do so, Brian shot him. The police also find out that Brian took a police radio, allowing him to hear all their communications and plans to track him down. Following this, Officer Chesner speaks on his radio, trying to get Brian to respond to trace his location. Brian hears Chesner's message directed at him. He remains silent for a while, but eventually replies after Chesner tells him there is no way out. However, Brian destroys the radio before they can pinpoint his location. The police are now aware of the general direction the radio signals came from, though they don't know his exact location. Back inside Ashley's house, Brian forces her to give him the hard drugs she takes. He then notices her reading the same book the therapist gave her. He asks her to read from the book, but tells her to stop when he realizes it is about God. While Brian is watching the news, Ashley begs him to let her go to her daughter's fashion show, but he refuses. Still watching the news, he discovers that the police have found the plate number of the car he recently stole. To avoid being caught, he forces Ashley to drive with him to the outskirts of town to drop off the car, making the police believe he has left the area. They both drive together, Ashley in her car and Brian in the truck he stole. They successfully drop off the truck and return to Ashley's house using her car, even though they are almost caught by the police. While driving back home, Ashley tells Brian that she lied and that her husband is not returning home. He died after being stabbed by a drug dealer. She blames herself for it as she had the opportunity to stop him, but didn't. The following morning, Brian seems to be a little nicer to Ashley. She prepares dinner and serves him. Brian then asks Ashley to read the same book he previously refused to him. Ashley reads The Purpose-Driven Life to Brian, and he listens attentively. He begins to see the truth about God's purpose for man as described in the book, but he struggles to accept it. He tells Ashley that he was afraid of being enslaved, which is why he killed the judge. He also confesses that shooting them felt good and that he thinks he has a demon. Brian asks Ashley if she could forgive him if he were the one who killed her husband. She tells him that she doesn't know, but that God could forgive him. Brian reflects on this and seems troubled. It appears as though he is being convicted of his crimes. A few moments later, Ashley begs Brian to let her go see her daughter, but he doesn't respond. Brian just sits on the ground looking very sad. She repeats herself, but Brian remains silent. Once again, she tells him that she is leaving, and Brian still just sits there. So she walks slowly to the door and starts her car. Brian goes to the window and watches her as she drives away, praying that he won't change his mind. And so she finally leaves. Just a few minutes away from the house, she calls the police and tells them that Brian is in her house. Following that, Brian is lying on the bed when he hears the loud sounds of helicopters and police cars surrounding the building. He quickly picks up his gun, preparing for a fight. All the officers surround the building, armed and ready, with Ashley among them. Seeing that there is no escape, Brian sends a message to his girlfriend, asking her to leave a message for his son. Despite the police's threats, Brian refuses to come out of the building. He responds by shooting the TV to scare the officers. When the police realize that Brian has no intention of surrendering, they ask Ashley to speak to him, believing she might be able to persuade him to turn himself in, just as she made him let her go. Ashley is reluctant but agrees. She talks to him through a megaphone, reminding him of the book they read together, but Brian still refuses to come out. However, just as the police are about to storm the house, Brian waves a white towel and comes out, surrendering himself. Ashley watches as he emerges. The officers quickly rush to him and apprehend him. Officer Chesner is quite amazed that Brian didn't put up a fight. After he is taken away, Chesner thanks Ashley for whatever she said to Brian that made him surrender without a fight. As Ashley is being refused entry to her house, which is now a crime scene, she turns to see her daughter and aunt arriving. She rushes over and hugs her daughter, apologizing for not making it to the fashion show. She also thanks her aunt for coming. At the end of the movie, we see that Ashley never returns to hard drugs. Instead, she helps others struggling with addiction. She also remarried and has 2 more children. Brian, on the other hand, is sentenced to multiple life terms and will only see his son when he turns 18. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to give a thumbs up and subscribe. Your support is appreciated. Remember, Jesus loves you. Have a blessed day, and see you next time.